I'll be old gentleman.
Sounds like the start of a gag.
I'm just going to do a quick check on the sound of the live stream.
Check something with that.
It's working out.
Andrew, do you mind just checking is the audio okay? Perfect, lovely, thank you. We're going to start in a few minutes. That's it, that sounded like I was going somewhere else with that sentence, I'm not. Reading. Right, welcome everyone to Manchester Poetry Library. Welcome everybody here in person, and I'm looking over here because that's where our web camera is. Welcome everyone who's joining us online. That's the first thing I wanted to make you aware of, that we are live streaming. It's a hybrid event. So the camera's over there. In the interval, I would suggest you don't tell anyone your password or sort code by that place, by the microphone, because we'll pick it up. I'm probably going to turn it down in the interval just for people at home, and then I'll turn it up again when the interval's over, and I'll call everyone back. This is our first hybrid live streamed event that we're doing this way, so email us with any feedback. We've got people monitoring it and checking for sound, so hopefully it'll go well. And I might make some adjustments to the camera depending on what happens as we go along. Housekeeping, toilets are, as you leave the Poetry Library, immediately on the right. There's a fire alarm. Please follow us to Cambridge Street. It shouldn't be a test. In a minute, I'm going to invite James Byrne to come up and introduce the event properly, but it would be remiss of me not to mention membership of the Poetry Library. If you're not already a member, please come and see me or Andrew while he's still here at the desk, and we can tell you all about that. Please buy books. That's the other thing I'm going to encourage you to do, but also borrow books if you already have your membership. And the last thing is also just to help yourself to food. I think the event today is going to be a reading, followed by an interval, followed by a little bit more reading. So there's lots of time to ask us questions. So please do come find me. My name is Martin. I'm the Programme Manager here at Manchester Poetry Library. And without further ado, if we could welcome James Byrne, please, to introduce tonight's event.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Hello to everybody out there as well in the digital sphere. It's great. It's a real pleasure to talk about Antony's work, familiar to many of us in the audience. This is his second book with Arc Publications. Prior to that was M, signature poem there about Manchester. Caldebroc is the latest book, and it's his second with Arc, as I say. It's somewhat of a continuation, an aesthetic continuation of a few long poems in there, but it's very different in its own way. I just want to thank Martin as well. It's great to see the stacks behind us for the reading. Last time I was here, it was all that way. We were all reading, but this is good because Scott can have the whole floor after Antony reads. Scott Thurston's going to do some movement and dance for us. So that's what we have coming up. As Martin says, we've got a two-part reading. I'm just going to briefly introduce Antony. And if I can begin as a southerner by saying that he's a major poet living in and writing about this part of England. And it's a good arrangement in the sense that he's working also with a major publisher in this part of the world, Arc Publications. Tony Ward and Angela Jarman are here. Good evening to you. Thanks for publishing this extraordinary book and for believing in Antony's work as we do. It's also, I think, I would say a modern classic, this book, in the sense that it looks across time. It begins with the Brontës, Charlotte Brontë explicitly, and Antony has this ability to take on a place and look at it in a way that I would say is both psychogeographic, but using psychohistory as well. And that all fuses together with his exceptional sense of hearing. Antony has perfect pitch. It's the kind of thing I teach at university. You can't teach somebody to have good hearing. You can encourage it perhaps, but Antony has such good hearing, and probably, I imagine, in fact, I do know a little bit about this, but has really good taste in music. Somebody who has listened and paid attention to sound and music, and so has this deep resonance and musicality in his work. And it's one of the things that first drew me to Antony's poetry when I first encountered it some 15 years ago. He is a brilliant and rigorous scholar as well, critic, but also he has written books about, most recently, the Meta-Modern book we were here to launch. Was it about a year ago? Feels about a year ago. He's written brilliantly about poets who I would say are somewhat aligned with his own aesthetic. I'm thinking of people like Geoffrey Hill, but also Tony Harrison, and I think that in terms of a sort of constellation of influence, Antony's reading is very wide-ranging, but certainly those two poets, and perhaps another poet in, say, Basil Bunting, I think of in Antony's work with that consideration of the sonic. Bunting said in an essay published in 1932, Some Limitations on English, that poetry, like music, is to be heard. So we're going to hear Antony in a moment. If I could just say that also he's written very movingly in both M, but also in this book, about a friend of his who was in the same cricket team, I believe, Kieran Racewell. So there's a continuation there of what I would call elegiac space. And there's also what I would call a hard hat poetics. Antony is one of these poets who's very observant of suburban space and quite literally how space is dug up. In fact, I can imagine you looking outside onto the square here, which has all been completely dug up, and writing from your office a few poems recently, but those aren't in the book. Maybe they're to come. But yes, this is extraordinary. I think of mostly common as an example in this book of how Antony is able to, as I said earlier, survey a place across time with a kind of archaeologist's sensitivity to space. Okay, I'm going to just introduce Antony to you now, what we might encounter. I'm not sure if he's going to read any of these poems, but as I say, the book begins with the Brontës, an extraordinary long poem about Charlotte Brontë and Elizabeth Gaskell's biography. We also encounter Bingley and the Yorkshire Ripper. In this book, we go to the boundary ropes of cricket pitches across Manchester, and that's where Kieran comes in. But we also take flight to New York, and also we encounter Icelandic saga. So it's a beautifully psychogeographic weave throughout this book, and it's psychohistorical, as I say, and also a deep sense of sort of psychoacoustics, how sound affects the mind. So you'll encounter this when you, as you all should, buy this book. And yeah, maybe we can just welcome Antony to the stage by creating a new word for him. I was thinking that we must do this. Somebody with such a rich vocabulary as Antony, let's create a word for him. So psychogeography, psychohistory, psychoacoustics. Here's the new word. Right, we're going to practice this. Psychogeohistacous. Okay? We can do it. Psychogeohistacous. After me. Psychogeohistacous. What a beautiful word, isn't it? So, Antony Rowland.
introduction. I'm slightly intimidated by it now. I might as well go home now. Get my coat. Thank you everybody for coming today and braving through the wonderful Manchester weather that we've been having for the last couple of days. For the benefit of the live stream, for Dennis in Nijmegen and anybody who's in Seattle at the moment, that was the first instance of sarcasm. Thank you everybody for coming. I think looking across the audience, I know quite a lot of the people, so it's wonderful to launch this book that I started a while ago now, 2017, with friends and colleagues. There's kind of a mixture, looking around, of people that are interested in poetry, people who have engaged in critical thinking at great length with, and people who I play cricket with as well, which I was saying to Jane Kilby earlier, that's perfect, that's live. That's wonderful. Thank you, I must say, of course, to Martin Kratz, as James said earlier, and the Poetry Library team for hosting this event. And thanks, as James said, to Tony and Angela, wonderful publishers for Mark. We've been working now for 50 years, improving the contemporary poetry scene. It wouldn't be the same without them. So thank you very much for your faith in the last 2 books that I've done. James mentioned that I did a launch of my critical book on metamodernism a couple of years ago. In that reading, I read a poem that I put in the preface, because it seemed to fit there, because I was talking about a guy who I used to know from University of Exeter called Richard, who became actually a kind of presiding spirit over that critical book, the writing of it, because he died in 2018. And also Richard is, again, a kind of presiding spirit over the first half, really, of this collection. He worked in the physical geography department in Exeter, so God knows how we managed to get on as a poet and a physical geographer interested in core sampling, but we did. Spent many happy family holidays together in Devon. So I thought it might be nice just to kind of plug into that reading last year that I did and read that particular poem first, which is from a sequence about Richard called Urswick. There's an epigraph to this poem which describes his memorial stone in Urswick, where he did a lot of his work, and it goes, Dr. Jones was a physical geographer whose research at this town and elsewhere around the world added greatly to knowledge of the Holocene. That's an Urswick Town Memorial. This is a poem for Richard's called Marl. Herons stumble the fetch. Urswick holds its splash, setting the tarn with our wake, appropriate as our grief through laughter, where grass spikes the meniscus and sunmotes blur our digital snap. Hug the embarrassment of this plaque, morning as clear as fish that roll air and under the boardwalk. We taste the edge of marron, faces in all shore directions, eyes string the reed buntings, jittering their pad. Marl adds to our knowledge of the Holocene. Your core sampler hods the pollen where forests mould to a crick and insects peat our memory. Grain fires the cap to a dating spree. Photos out-tilt the jetty's pitch as we walk out in our guilty retrieval. Okay, the second poem I'll read is the beginning of a sequence, as James said. There's lots of sequences in this book, following on from my last collection, M. This one is about the Yorkshire Ripper, or as I call him, locating him more exactly, given my background, the Bingley Ripper. As some of you know, some of you don't know me may have guessed from the accent so far, I'm from that part of the world, from Bradford. And it's hard to kind of overestimate the effect that the Ripper had on young kids growing up in Bradford. I'd have been around the ages 5 to 10 at the time. And we all imagine the Ripper, and of course the moniker the Ripper didn't help to be this kind of fantastical, grotesque, super-worldly figure. And of course the truth turned out to be much more mundane. He was a lorry driver from Bradford. And I found out that when I was reading a book on the Ripper recommended by Jen Kilby a few years ago, that he actually used to live over the road from me, from where I grew up, on an estate called Hunters Park in Bradford. He lived with his wife Sonia and Sonia's parents for going on for a year, which is listening, as I said over there. Rather than being some fantastical being, he was actually going to the same newsagents and probably buying 20 MC extra mile at the same time. So this kind of sequence was partly to kind of try and describe that, come to terms with that. So I ended up having a long sequence where I would have one poem at the beginning about me, about growing up, about Bingley, about Bradford, about the area, and then a poem after it about the Ripper, and then I kind of carry that on throughout the sequence. So I'll just read the kind of scene setting first two poems. So this is the Bingley Ripper. Trees across the valley, moss, they're burning, ink, their reds and copper in an ashlar sky. Our family's hall to Shipley Glen, boulders like Easter statues wrote from the glaciers, streaming from Elterwater, or Great Gable, dropped a throne from the Ferncliff estate, and fairground smells ghosted with slot, tarpaulins as sighs gutted in the autumn. Dodge a hat and suck to your parting gob. Walser a magnet for scroll, itinerant cows, parched beaches planing the rock's edge, smaller boulders hiding the thumbed gum, and fish paper greased transparent. They always stood for something else. Fumbles in the cut, assignations on a cliff as dangerous as a spangled durex. Across the Ivy Valley, NF brushed in a Dulux scrawl. Leeds or Bradford whitening the lower divisions across the hopeless air. Lined with beams, we nosed across a ridge, hit the Ilkley turn where sound punctured the valley air. Pocked cracks, an impossible green dipping to beck and then following stone. Silent, then a shotgun as admonishment. Even the flags are quiet on Baildon's heath in the pub's warning of its own cross. Kecks are sanded on the wind down to salts. Chin past the unseasonal yet hanging lights where our chips are straight to the mill. Coat dry stone snow. A woodpecker grins its lice. Second point. Bingley mosses, Ufane Gormless, Gaskell. Brontës was sullen as Glen Peat, friendly as a glacier, self-sufficient, churlish, loving and laughing at nothing, kind as stones no intervening could gauge. Excommunicated villages, magnet to pawn. You climb eggs to flap it Baildon and ridge of Dick Turpin for a breathing pint. The Air Valley airs its annual bull show. Regional certainties, cropped bark for plot, crap molars on the dumped parking pigs. Hoard your silence unless you harbour heirs. Sutcliffe benefits from custom. Iron wills churn to the past like mild, a raised choir at night with the sauceworks lush abide. Canals barge cuts, Five Eyes lock stands as gibbet over the culvert. Brazen as a view, the cargo of commuter slickers moaning. Concrete bunkers offend with civic graffiti. Undercutting chimneys divide their stubs, airing their circles. Bingley cobble warrens empty to a river, and game throttles. Sutcliffe tries to follow in outcropped steps. Grandad's outplates of mutton offal elbowed from kitchens. Your mum ladles chicklins and tripe that stretches your guts. Reet, parting the cow heels sucked to trot. Cheek, your dad screamed when his chin lit with the boiling gravy. Fireballs chipped the heights, dry stone walls to light our kid. Okay, so that's the first two from that sequence. I'll now go on to another very different one, which is about cash, money, finance. A few years ago, I was reading, I don't know if anybody else got these, they stopped sending them now. Actually, the banks used to send me every quarter a kind of pamphlet, like a poetry pamphlet, called precisely where it's at the time from, the Investment Manager's Report, which I ignored for many years, just threw them a bit and recycled them. And then I must have been feeling particularly bored at some moment a few years ago, so I actually picked up one and started to read it. I was immediately struck by what a bizarre publication this was, this kind of fantasy, fictional account of what was kind of happening with financial markets. And the way it described financial markets as kind of operating like slightly over-pampered, skittish, I was going to say children, but that would be an offence to Izzy in the audience. So I'm going to say human beings instead. I mean, just really bizarre, irrational nonsense. So that kind of got me interested in some of the major figures of the financial crisis of 2008, which these poems are partly about. One of them was called Philip Graham. I think there's an old senator in the US who wrote in 2001, this is from the epigraph for the poems. This is Philip Graham. Some people look at subprime lending and see evil. I look at subprime lending and see the American dream in action. Current estimates are that Philip Graham's deregulatory policies at the time have cost the US state £150 billion so far. One of the other poems is about a guy called Fred Goodwin. I don't know if anybody recognises that name. He used to be the head of Barclays Bank. Was knighted before he retired. Luckily for him, he retired about a year before the financial crisis. So when that hit in 2008, there were all the pictures in the media of him sunning himself on a nice beach. He was famous for saying that, how can a man live on $3 million a year? Is one of his quotes. Lovely guy, very good one. Ex-head of Barclays Bank. The poem I'll read is another of these figures called Alan Greenspan. This particular poem is part of the Investment Manager's Report. It's called We Sponsored September. Warning, might be more sarcasm in this. We sponsored September. Price as indices rarely cite the vendor. This table is commonly used to provide aid in your asset class as reality blooms like a pupil into understanding. Historical analysis is a forecast, but you must assume the entire risk to predict. We disclaim all warranties of originality, accuracy, completeness, timeliness, and non-infringement of a particular purpose. Wall, 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 wall. To me, that's a holy place. Do not accept errors or omissions. We sponsored September, and it peaked. After that, mounting material polished its sell-off, while investors overwhelm the overview. Listen, oh gold pipes, to this Archimedes, squinting at the mirror like an equity market, buzzing in geopolitical issues and tissues, winding the fizzing blood of trend concerns. Smack it through liquidity into light and the chundering tongue on cancelled debt. Jerome Powell suggests a hit, a line of pumice stone as his hawkish comments grew a sleeve. Party with his sponge, Sell off November to the technology sector amidst concerns about hope implemented in an ever-widening China where major banks continue creeping their foamy edge. Polish your globes into waxy moons and pressure the oil into plunging food. Quantitative waning lowers its rose. Brexit works towards the UK's resignation as the market plunged October into May. Volatile as August, equities risked a douche and peak that fell into excessive fiction. Bring down the target to sentiment and oil me with the most unguent perfumes when trust erodes the poles to power base. Robust as a tight Germany GDP, towel a dovish boost to prompted gains as Epe's China steams its measures, fueling the effect of a worry stem after the rupee discounted the Pacific and the Nikkei index hit a bellwether and sold October for Japanese steel, but the yen was weaker against a balloon. So slow down tit for tat to a bleak backdrop. China can fall as well as rise. A policymaker who proposes the overseas to the past and emerges into a settlement with the minibar at the time of a custody of securities at the level of a target guaranteed to emerge. Okay, last time I'll read in this sequence. This is something that Jane said earlier about music. I'm interested in music. I sat writing a sequence of poems whilst listening to some of my favourite music, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, a while ago. And to my surprise, actually writing at the same time as listening to music actually made me more attentive to the music, kind of weirdly. So this sequence comes up. I'll just read one before we have a break. This is a John Coltrane poem, Train on Fifth. So it's an epigraph from John Coltrane. I didn't go far enough. John Coltrane, 1960. Death and the kiosk are all that are close. Stoplight. There is no air in this city, but there is breath. No acidity in a coffee, marooned on formica, bulging to hold, diurnal as poison. Bend from the line, quit resolution. Unlike a painting, you must return, but too much roll and snare if you bust. Just out of peach on Fifth. The piano underwrites its hand, trilled to reflection. Pedal me, not jacks over the overheated, or stop when you've ticked the notes. Rim bass that weighs like bread. Finger to peg stretch in the city's peck. Cymbals assemble morning. 3 conversations and a lost bar. Scream reed held to cream fruition and reprise on a stick wrangle. Brittle without vibrato. Treble bass releases slurs and drifts. Back in. Quieten to chord where fingers tremble around the left just before it locks. Shriek to hear. Ghost melody. Waterphonic evenings in rooms that shift. False fingers out of the door. Thank you. We'll have a break now for 2 minutes. itself to the refreshments. There's still lots left, still loads of crisps to go. And Tony and Angela, I think, will be selling them on.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
Andrew, could you check?
We'll have a drink, I think some people will eat, like a sandbar or something like that.
Right, everyone, grab the drinks. We're going to start the second half now. I hope everyone online can still hear me. There we go. I'm going to adjust the sound quickly. No, it looks like it's all good. In that case, reintroduce you. Thank you, everyone. And I'll pass it back to Antony Rowland.
Okay, thanks again, everybody, and thank you for everybody watching and listening on the live stream as well. As I said, I know Dennis from Nijmegen is probably listening. I know Sarah from Manchester is as well. Thanks for all the kind comments coming in on the break. As a kind of a child of the pre-digital age, and I was amazed we can kind of get the feedback from people just over analysis. The reading progresses as well as the feedback live. I'll go back to the beginning for the second half. I'll read a bit from the sequence that James mentioned at the beginning about the Brontës, in particular Charlotte Brontë. This sequence came about partly because I'm from Bradford, Martin cracks us very well, Paris is BD22, which is mentioned in the book, it's part of Bradford. So, as a kid, I was always under the, no doubt mistaken idea that the Brontës were kind of somehow ours. Although as a teenager, probably the closest I got to the parsonage was when I used to work for Bradford Council. I used to empty the bins in the house, so I used to go past the parsonage and bins around the back. But then, many years later, I came across the book The Life of Charlotte Brontë by Elizabeth Gaskell, and pretty soon got sucked into all the criticisms of Elizabeth Gaskell for kind of presenting the people from Harrith as these kind of noble savages who were living in this village in the middle of nowhere, cut off from the outside world. And one of the lines that I take as an epigraph, this poem is from Gaskell's book, which is Manchester and Leeds, where are they? It's just on the moon. That wasn't the case even in the early to mid 19th century. I was also really pissed off as well, because when I was a student, I wrote an essay about the Brontës, and I was rewarded with this red scroll all the way through one paragraph. It was that long ago, it was red scroll. And I was accused of adding to the Brontë myth, like Elizabeth Gaskell, by making some comment about, learned from my dad actually, about Patrick Brontë not wanting to have curtains in the parsonage because he was afraid that they might catch fire and the parsonage would burn down. Some of this scroll said, this is nonsense, you're just kind of adding to the myth of this Gothic family in the middle of nowhere. Then about 30 years later I came across the notes to Elizabeth Gaskell's Life of Elizabeth Brontë, where the eminent Victorian scholar Angus Eason refers precisely to curtains in the parsonage not being there because Patrick was afraid that they would be burned down. So this sequence is partly, as I put it in the footnotes of this book, kind of drawing a line under a pupil's simmering indignation. So the sequence takes some of the lines from Gaskell's book and also kind of adds my own kind of observations and memories of Harrith and Bradford. So Worth, Manchester and Leeds, where are they? Sleuth hounds pursue their money and purse against the hoarfrost. The hale men lingering custom, spinning at the great wheels until factories crash the dawn. Declivities tend to brutalise, the roads draining, the sleep rinks, to magnates of secluded hamlets, where you stare to alter a pump, the bill as gel in your folding plans. Ancestral homes are a dense thaw. Among the becks and minerals, arvels pitch between mourners, where we now rub a cottage bed, half naked and blooded as a foot race. Psalms flog the church mournings of Norse ancestors who repair the bull as respect, stored with cold possets and the dog's nose of a chaste ale. Shirk your liquor and face a pausing. Hardening as mint cake, the people turn addle and die among the sumphishness of fire hogs, the defibrillator hung as relic by those panting over stamps, the wreck divining the branches. Strangers came from beyond Burnley. Finial teeth lodged their slate, their boxer lintel punched with crosses, their clouds weigh a widowed tarn, carts distort the angled panes. The horse races were objectionable, combustible to wickedness, tea scones busted with currants by a stream enhanced with liquor, a stone cross bought to its pleas. He brought his earnestness, rain buckets that spurn the feast, no beast or footing for a man, the faithful ministration of a pint, the peeled virtue of heart and soul. Give dissenters their kale through the reek, backbites and sniggle. Dogs warm pelts in the sotted aperture of the fox and goose, where a guitar unseats our pints with its bend leather, greedy to palm. Over the stiles he were, the sty of a grouse's mizzle, sticking the doors of the chapelry, hunting to quaff the rigour of a grapefruit of a pale chinook. Rain intensifies the tiles, the deadening orange boys, the swell of beams that need sticking, reminiscences that stand a pillar. Sentimental stations will be made. Okay, the second poems I'll read are from another sequence. This is called Caldebroc. It's actually when James has introduced that. I thought it was quite interesting. I never thought of this actually, because Caldebroc is an Old English word for Eccles, Manchester district. Don't actually think about it because nobody knows how to pronounce it. I was kind of thinking it was Caldebroc, but you pronounce it slightly differently. Who knows? Nobody will ever know. So, quite like that. This sequence is an elegy for Kieran Crump Racewell. His father's in the audience today. I started this sequence actually in my last collection, M, and I've carried it on into this book, and it will go beyond this book because when Kieran died, I decided that what I was going to do as a writer was kind of write a celebration of his life, but do that through writing a poem for every single postcode in Manchester, the city in which he lived and loved. And started in about 2013-14, I think, those first poems. I'm on M42 at the moment. I'm kind of stuck around Earl and Cadishead at the moment, but I'll get there to M50, which is Manchester Airport. And I've said this before in other readings, that I've noticed some weird things along the way about Manchester postcodes. For example, M10 does not exist, or rather, it only exists in Coronation Street. The characters want to refer to a postcode in Coronation Street, they use M10, precisely because weirdly it's fiction. The two poems that I'll read from the sequence for Kieran called Caldebroc, and I think it's about M26, probably got that wrong, Swinton, and M42, which is over by Strangeways, the old prison that shut down a few years ago. This was written actually just as it shut down. We're actually in this last poem in the White Hotel, a club in Salford that some of you may be familiar with. But firstly, Swinton. Eggle's violence hones its drill where a candle dries to a spat in Swinton, a tongue that banked its river, now a marina coated with tench, culvert stack and landfill tipping. You should be passing edges. Instead, you're passing anniversaries run in this ton pen and Celtic burr. A white bicycle prints the lane as chalk. The bridge disappears as traffic flak in Wardley. Crashed Forsythia an evening bulb. Skunk clings to roots like levers, their livers fighting like shrapnel, where the light sticks on Raby Street and yellow cameras watch the night. M42, Strangeways. The evening falls to a burst string. The hung audience smokes its cool as rain exits the bouncer's hands. An offender feeds the shutter, an open cord into the white where Strangeways towers its closure. The arms empties to a wolf moon. Red lights carry the silence and our fear settles the fog, exposed as your voice, softer now, on a footbridge threatening a map. Cans beach the Irwell and canned factories press to yellow cones that spell our night. Planes outwit the stars. Count four to orchestrate. Our scrapped bars Jenga the lot. Okay, I shall switch back to the last couple of poems to the Investors Management Report. I'll read another one from that. As I do this, I'm going to have to get some more water, so I'm going to go towards a live stream momentarily. It's quite long, so that's why I'm just getting a bit of water. This is for the guy I mentioned earlier, Fred Goodwin, the other guy from Barclays Bank. One detail that I mention in this poem is that he apparently used to hate mess in his Barclays office, his office workers so much, that he actually patented and invented a new kind of filing cabinet, which had a slope at the top, so that if anybody tried to put papers on top of it, then you just slide down. Papers on the top. This poem is also about the fact that during the financial crisis, loads of people began to throw eggs at his house. As I said, he was really worried that he might have his night taken away from him. This is called Fred the Shred is Dead. An accompanying table of asset class aids your understanding of the provided vendor. Indices cited as a magnitude performance. Sterling performance, sterling. This is a commonly used calendar year sports return. Though magnitude does not constitute advice, and the source for your internal use may not be reproduced or disseminated in a form or basis, do you think monkeys give? Let's all slope cabinets to shuck others' mess. Always refrain from making historical data, since analysis should guarantee risk. After all, the user informs on affiliates, each person merchantability without purpose. But please do not pursue my family. Do you have any punitive, incidental consequences? Use permission to distribute without approval. Copy Russell footsying the footsie, dripping with a data vest. We do not endorse the content, written consent, but enjoy the momentum of a subdued Canada and emerging concerns, tightened liquidity of the Chinese fall on material emission. Do not take the sword off this banker night. Write a dollar-denominated trade feed, providing wind and a headstand off escalation. Higher tariffs on an ever wider range of bachelors. Bray the qualitative tightening. The Fed guided hikes through the remainder. The valley in which England rates the gradual. Terminate the autumn and replace it with a Bank of Japan. How can a man live on 3 million a year? In Europe, political uncertainty breaches limits with sentiment after Johnson lagged and slowed to robust June. Flowers are unlikely to fall to the unemployment rate, but keep cat's eyes on impressive forecasts. Chicken the storm while I eye some golf. European markets did announce the Swedish, didn't they? But Italy was weaker, bonded, deadlock, no deal. Brexit entrenched and led technology like a bear driver, liking its basis to First America, raised to an insinuation and a fake aid, dimming the dispute between Korea and a shift. You turn my house into an omelette. Japan unsettled us with the Philippines. Stem the aggregate to denomination. Anti-Abe rebounded into scandal and favoured decline over deepening warrants, although personally the DOJ targeted the tit-for-tat January peak market, June locked between the yuan. Pension me with your manufactured love. Clamp down on excessive exposure. Any views are subject to change without notice. We no longer accept new information. If you have not matured, penned your instruction. If you have less, use a telephone. If you'd like to withdraw proceeds, stop reading. Okay, I'll go back to the beginning for the last poem that I'll read. This is another one from the sequence about Richard Jones. Sequence called Erswick. This one's called Burator. You can find it. Which is about a lot of the kind of family holidays that we went on as kind of in our 40s and the children were quite young. This is why they have contents, page 55. Erswick. In Memoriam, Richard Thomas Jones, 1970, Jude 2018. Burator. You are entering a different poem. First chemo's fluff to even skin, while ointment replaces the hormone fuzz. The cutting evens with trees. You laugh at funerals in a culvert as minerals juice the navy's stern and fall in copper water to the hand of a saved month and a cuppa that cuts through damaged buds. Spring offends. The wagtail's yellow mints a bench where we mumble through our lunch. This is not a cancer poem. Relieve the mud with a warbler's turn. tribute echoes into Tamar sludge. Our children once bulbed and pit and poddled the sand, tawls and pebble cairns as your distant pills. Thank you. Thanks everybody again for coming tonight, and carry on, finish the refreshments, care of, I should have said at the beginning, the 8th day, and also the HRC Actual Humanities Research Council. So do finish them, plenty of crisps are left, and I think there are a couple of books left if anybody still wants to buy it. Thank you very much.
I've got to drink some water in the middle. It's all right. Scotland to Middle East rival. Really good on the pen.